Episode 1. The last hymn at Saint Amara. They sang only once, and then they were gone. That night it happened. The moon above Saint Amara's school for girls bled into the sky like a ruptured vein. Thick clouds clung to the spire of the old chapel, and they reeked of wet stone and unsaid prayers. Inside, 12 students stood in perfect rows, robed in white, lips trembling as they prepared to perform a hymn no one had ever rehearsed. The chapel doors were locked. No teachers were present. Midnight Mass had not been scheduled. And yet, the girls sang. Eva saw everything. She wasn't supposed to be there. She didn't even speak. The mute orphan had woken up moments before with a sharp ringing in her earth notes, unspoken yet vivid, calling her down the stone corridor like invisible hands tugging her by the soul. She peeked through the cracked wooden doors of the chapel. That's when she saw them, 12 of her classmates, standing beneath the crucifix that always seemed to weep with condensation. They didn't hold hymnals. They weren't guided by a conductor. But somehow, in one simultaneous breath, they began to sing. And what a song it was! It wasn't Latin. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language Eva had ever heard. It slithered and soared, pulled at the ear like invisible claws. Her bones vibrated with every note. Her knees trembled. The melody felt strong like it had existed long before humanity learned to speak, long before scripture had a voice. Then the candles blew out. One by one, the girls stopped singing, as if silenced mid-breath. But they didn't scream. They didn't run. They simply vanished. No sound, no wind, no collapse of floorboards or whispered prayer. Just a humming silence, thick and expectant. Eva pushed the doors open in horror. The pews were empty. The altar cold. No trace of the choir remained, except for the mirrors. Every mirror in the chapel had cracked, but Eva saw them, the reflections. 12 girls still standing, mouths open in silent chorus, eyes blank, staring not at their own reflections but at Eva. And then, as if summoned by breathless memory, the last line of the hymn echoed in her head though she had never learned the words. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing, unable to make a sound. Behind her, the crucifix creaked. Christ's head had turned. Episode 2. The unseen note. Paper doesn't bleed, but this one did. They found her the next morning, curled on the stone floor of the chapel, eyes wide open, lips trembling, but not a sound escaping. Eva had always been mute, but now she was silent in a different way, like someone who had seen too much to ever speak again. Sister Catherine, headmistress of Saint Amara's, dismissed it as a sleepwalking incident. The 12 girls who went missing, she claimed they had been sent home for a spiritual retreat. But no letters were sent, no suitcases packed, no witnesses. Only Eva remembered. And the blood. Later that evening, while the school remained quiet and suspiciously calm, Eva slipped back into the chapel alone. The moonlight filtered through stained glass, casting fractured saints and angels onto the cracked mirrors. The air was cold, colder than the rest of the building as if the room hadn't been touched by sunlight in years. She walked toward the organ. It hadn't worked in decades, just clung to its keys like ash on old bones. But tonight, it smelled like iron, like something freshly broken open. That's when she saw it, a folded sheet of parchment, wedged beneath the organ bench, yellowed, frayed at the edges, and bleeding from the center like it had a pulse. She touched it. Her fingers came away red. The hymn was there at an ending too dark to be black, in symbols that shifted when she stared along. They writhed across the page like insects under a glass, rearranging themselves into forms that almost resembled notes and almost resembled eyes. She turned the page. The bleeding stopped. Suddenly, the organ wheezed. One key depressed itself middle C, then another. A slow, dragging melody played into the chapel air, the same haunting rhythm she had heard the night before. But no one Saturday at the bench. The organ played itself. She tried to move, but her feet felt nailed to the floor. A tear slid down her cheek as the final note echoed longer, deeper, until it was no longer a sound but a presence. Behind her, something whispered, not in her ear, in her blood. She turned. The 12 choir robes were draped neatly over the front pew, still warm, as if the girls had just stepped out of them moments ago. And on the back wall, where a crucifix once hung, was a message scrawled in dark, runic strokes, "Send us back." Complete the hymn. Eva dropped the sheet and ran, but the song didn't stop. It hummed beneath the floorboards. It vibrated through the chapel walls, and inside her chest, a strange voice began to stir that was not hers. Episode 3. The Nun Who Sewed Her Ears Shut. There's a reason some people choose not to hear God. Eva wasn't sent to class the next morning. Sister Catherine had confined her to the infirmary, muttering something about spiritual fatigue and mild possession. The school was quite too quiet for a place with 12 missing girls. But that night, someone entered her room. She didn't knock. She didn't speak. She simply stood in the doorway, a thin shadow wrapped in gray habit, her face partly veiled, her hands gloved, her presence like a grave that had never been blessed. Sister Magdalena, the oldest nun in Saint Amaras, the one who never taught, the one they said had once been locked in the bell tower for 3 days and 3 nights after screaming during a Sunday Mass. Eva had never seen her up close before. The old nun slowly approached, dragging a long string of rosary beads behind her like a chain. She sat her beside Eva and placed a weathered leather notebook on the bed. It smelled of incense and dust and something fouler beneath. Then she removed her veil. Eva gasped no, choked, not at the hollow cheeks or the sunken eyes, but at the scars. 2 long, precise stitches ran across Sister Magdalena's ears. Not scars from an accident. No, these had been done deliberately. She had sewn her ears shut, and then, with trembling, arthritic fingers, she wrote a single sentence into Eva's notebook. I heard the hymn in 1947. I survived, but only because I stopped listening. Eva stared at her, her throat dry, her fingers hovering over the blood-stained music sheet she had hidden beneath her mattress. She pulled it out, laid it flat. Magdalena's eyes widened. With trembling hands, the nun reached into her robe and pulled out a faded photograph. 12 girls, standing in the exact same spot where Eva had seen the choir vanish. Same posture, same white robes, same vacant stares. Everyone thought they burned in a fire. The old nun scribbled, but they sang. That was the truth. And the song took them. Eva tried to ask how. Why? Magdalena's next words were jagged, desperate. The hymn predates the Bible. It was never written by man. It feeds on belief and sound. Then she stood, and with a slow, shaking hand, pointed to her sewn ears. Do not listen, not again. She stepped out into the hallway, leaving only silence behind. But Eva couldn't stop hearing it. The low hum, the breathless canes, the phantom note just beneath the skin of the world. It was back, and this time, it wanted her voice. Episode 4, Psalm of the Hollow Voice. Some voices are borrowed, others are stolen. Eva had never spoken a word in her life, not even a cry when she was born. Her silence had always been her curse and her shield. But tonight, her mouth trembled open, and someone else spoke through her. It began at 3:33 a.m. She woke gasping, her breath icy, her hands clutching the blood-stained music sheet, without realizing how it got into her bed again. Outside, the wind howled like it was being punished. Inside, the room pulsed with a soundless vibration like a choir warming up in the walls. Then, from the depths of her throat, a single word spilled out. That night, it wasn't her voice. It wasn't even a voice that belonged to a girl. It was deep, hollow, like it had been echoing through caves and catacombs for centuries before ever finding a mouth. Eva stumbled to the mirror. Her lips were moving, her eyes wide with terror, and yet her body felt distant like she was watching herself from behind a veil of glass. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. Her reflection kept speaking, Latin, ancient, elegant, terrifying, and worst of all, familiar. She had heard this voice before. It belonged to Peter, one of the 12 missing choir members. She remembered his face clearly. He had sung the highest note that night, trembling with fear but unable to stop. Now his voice was inside her, reciting something rhythmically, like a psalm, like a spell. Her body collapsed to the floor, limbs twitching. A sound filled the room, not from her lips, but from the air around her. The walls vibrated, the crucifix above her bed cracked. The hymn was trying to complete itself, and she was becoming the final instrument. Suddenly, her door burst open. Sister Magdalena stood there, her face pale as death. She held up a relic, a cracked silver censer swinging with smoke that didn't rise. but fell. She whispered a prayer. The voice inside Eva shrieked. Blood poured from her nose as she gasped, retaking control of her breath, her throat, her silence. Magdalena knelt beside her and held her hand. "Your voice is not yours anymore," she said, "but it can still be saved." Eva blinked. Her tears stung. She had spoken. After all these years, but only as a vessel. She reached for the music sheet. Trembling, the last verse was slowly revealing itself, not in ink, but in dry blood. 12 voices, 1 missing verse, and a 13th offering. Episode 5. The bells that rang from beneath the ground. The chapel's bell tower had been empty for decades, but something was ringing from below. It started the night after Eva spoke with Peter's voice. The ground beneath Saint Amara's trembled subtly at first, like a heartbeat far beneath the skin to notice. But Eva felt it, in her teeth, in her bones, and in the blood-stained music sheet, which pulsed faintly whenever she got near it. At precisely 3:33 a.m., the sound came. Bells, not 1, not 2, 12. They chimed in slow, dreadful succession, each tone deeper than the last, as if being rung not by hands, but by memories buried too long. But the strangest thing wasn't that the sound echoed through the school. It was that it came from beneath the chapel floor. Sister Magdalena knew. She had waited for it. "They're not bells," she told Eva, her voice trembling as she held a trembling candle. "They're ribs, hollowed out by the song. That place under the altar, it's not a tomb. It's a choir pit." Eva stared at her, heart pounding. A pit, a choir, buried. The next day, they descended. Magdalena led Eva to the chapel after nightfall, unlocking a small iron gate behind the altar. A staircase spiraled, downward, cracked, narrow, dust-choked. No one had walked it in decades. Perhaps no one was meant to. The deeper they went, the more distorted the air became. The walls sweated, though it was cold. Whispered melodies slithered from cracks in the stone. Eva's ears bled, yet she pressed forward. And then they found it. A room, circular, carved entirely of bone. Skulls lined the walls, mouths open as if mid-song. Rib bones had been shaped into a crude altar, darkened with something too thick to be wax. At the center, 12 choir robes, perfectly arranged in a circle. Each robe held a candle. Each candle was lit, yet no one had entered before them. On the floor, something had been etched, a symbol not found in any scripture. It pulsed faintly, as if reacting to Eva's presence. Magdalena gasped. She fell to her knees, clutching her ears, weeping. The final verse, "It was never meant to be sung aloud," she cried. But Eva didn't hear her. She was staring at the center of the circle. A 13th robe had been laid out, and it was her size. Suddenly, the bells rang again, louder now, shaking the earth, cracking the ceiling above. The room began to breathe, and somewhere in the shadows, voices began humming in perfect, ghostly harmony. Episode 6. The hymn that rewrites the gospel. Holy words are meant to save. These words were meant to unmake. The night they found the 13th robe, Saint Amara's chapel refused to stay silent. Every hour, the walls groaned like a living thing, and the crucifix above the altar dripped a thin line of water, or was it tears? Eva could no longer tell. She didn't sleep. Neither did Sister Magdalena. Another night, Father Raphael arrived. He was the only priest who dared return to Saint Amara's after the first choir vanished decades ago. Tall, gaunt, with eyes that looked as though they'd seen too much of hell, he carried a small box of Tulsa crucifix, a vial of holy water, and a journal that looked almost as old as the chapel itself. "I will write down everything," he whispered to Magdalena as he Saturday at the altar. "Every word that has corrupted this place. The hymn must be contained." But the hymn didn't want to be contained. At exactly midnight, as the moon cast fractured light through the stained glass, Father Raphael began to write. His hand moved quickly, furiously, like something unseen was guiding him. Page after page, the ink scratched deeper, darker, until the words were no longer his own. Eva, hiding behind the pews, felt the air grow heavy. Each line he wrote seemed to coil around the room like smoke, warping the shadows into shapes that were almost human. A soft humming began, 12 voices in perfect harmony. "Stop," Magdalena hissed. "You're transcribing it." But Raphael's eyes were wide. unblinking, possessed. The journal before him was no longer filled with scripture. I was rewriting the book of Revelation, line by line, in reverse. The final line he wrote before his hand began to tremble read, "They didn't vanish. They were offered." The crucifix above the altar creaked. This time, it wasn't water that dripped, it was blood. Thick, red drops slid down Christ's face, staining the white altar cloth below. The air trembled with a low, resonant note. Eva's chest tightened. The journal slipped from Raphael's hand, falling open on the stone floor. From its pages, the hymn rose in it as ink, but as sound. It sang itself, a voice so alien, so ancient, it didn't feel like it belonged to the earth. Then Raphael screamed. His eyes rolled back, and his body convulsed. The hymn had not just rewritten the gospel, it was rewriting him. His skin crawled with black symbols, crawling like ink alive beneath his flesh. Eva clamped her hands over her ears. But it was too late. She could feel the song threading through her veins, pulling her toward the 13th rope. "Burn it," Magdalena shouted, grabbing the journal. "If we don't end this, we'll join them." But as the nun tried to strike a match, every candle in the chapel went out at once. The hymn didn't need pages anymore. It was inside all of them now. Episode 7, the tape that shouldn't exist. Some recordings capture sound. This one captured souls. The fire never caught. Sister Magdalena struck the match 3 times, her fingers shaking, her breath heavy with fear. The flame flared, then indeed snuffed out by something that didn't want the hymn to burn. Father Raphael lay unconscious at the altar, blood trickling from his ears. The journal still open beside him like a mouth frowning mid-scream. Eva ran. She didn't know where, just away from the chapel, from the altar, from the feeling that the hymn had stopped echoing in the air and started echoing inside her bones. She ended up in the basement archive, a place the nuns rarely entered. It smelled like mold, dust, and old secrets. She had never been there before, and yet her hands moved as if they had done this before, sliding aside forgotten boxes, pushing past cobweb shelves, reaching behind an ancient filing cabinet until they touched metal. A reel-to-reel tape recorder. Its surface was cold, too cold. A faded label had been glued to its side, the words scratched in ink that bled. "Do not play. IT remembers you." Her fingers trembled. She pressed play. The machine groaned to life, coughing out static. Then, silence. Long, breathless silence. And then a single, humming note, so low and full, it seemed to push the air out of the room. Then the voices began. Not music, not words, just breathing. 12 different breath patterns. Inhale, exhale, timed, harmonized. Eva felt her heart drop. She recognized the rhythm. It was the same tempo the choir had used the night they vanished. But then came the 13th breath, one that matched her own. And in that moment, she understood. This wasn't just a recording. It was a ritual, a trap for echoes, a prison for souls. She tried to stop it, but the tape kept spinning. Even with no power, the humming turned into soft-chanting, a twisted, decaying melody that should not have existed in any world touched by God. The walls of the archive began to sweat. Shadows shifted on their own. The crucifix on the wall turned upside down without a sound. And then she heard her name, Eva, spoken in the voice of Peter. But Peter was gone. She backed away, terrified. As the tape reached its final seconds, the machine clicked, and from the speaker, 12 voices sang a single verse in perfect unison. "Return to the pit. Finish the hymn. Be one of us." The room fell silent, except the recorder had started spinning again, backward. Episode 8, The Conductor in the Confessional. Some sins can't be forgiven, especially the ones that haven't happened yet. After the tape, Eva refused to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the 13th breath, not outside her body, but within it, sighing through her lungs like a voice that had always belonged to someone else, then had stopped being a sound. It was a presence now, and it was guiding her back to the chapel. She entered just before dawn. The stained glass windows were black with condensation, as though the saints had wept themselves blind. Shadows clung to the pews like sleeping things. The crucifix no longer hung a nail remained. Eva's breath turned shallow as she stepped toward the confessional. It was open, not the priest's side, but the sinners, and someone was inside. A figure Saturday hunched in the darkness, robed in black, hands resting on his knees, unmoving. A conductor's baton, a slander, made of something that looked too much like Bonera, stood beside him. The booth was lit from within, but no candle flickered. Eva stepped forward. The moment she crossed the threshold, the light vanished. The door slammed shut behind her. She was trapped in the sinner's box. But it wasn't her turn to speak. A voice poured through the lattice. Why did you stop singing? It wasn't demanding. It was curious, gentle, like a music teacher disappointed in his most promising student. She tried to scream. Nothing came out. The voice returned. The song remembers you. Eva, you were meant to finish it. They sang their part. Now it's your verse. Her hands trembled as the air grew heavy with incense and mold. Through the screen, she saw the figure move, just his hand tapping the baton gently against the wall. Tap, 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 3 times. A signal, the same tempo as the tape. I will give you your voice, he whispered, but you must give me your silence. Eva's throat burned. The voice inside her itched, caught, begged to be released. And then, slowly, deliberately, the man turned his head toward the screen. He had no face, just skin, smooth, pale, stitched where a mouth should have been, but in the center of his forehead, a single, vertical eye, open, unblinking, bleeding. Confess, he said. Sing. Eva gasped, and for the first time since childhood, her voice escaped her lips not in words, but in melody, a single, haunting note. The confessional began to shake. Wood cracked, the eye in the figure's forehead widened, and from the shadows behind her, 12 other voices joined in. Episode 9. The Mass Where No One Breathes. It wasn't a service, it was a rehearsal, and the dead knew their parts by heart. No one called the Mass, no bells rang, no candles were lit, no prayers were whispered, and yet, every student and sister at St. Amars awoke before dawn, rose from their beds, and, walked barefoot, wordless into the chapel, as if summoned by an instinct older than sleep. Eva followed, not because she wanted to, but because the hymn had replaced her heartbeat. The chapel was darker than ever. The stained glass windows had turned a deep crimson. As though bleeding from within, the crucifix had returned, but Christ now hung upside down, arms not outstretched, but folded across his chest like a corpse in a tomb. The pews were full. Every girl, every nun, even Father Raphael, still pale and trembling from the night the hymn rewrote his scripture, stood at the altar in silence. No one spoke, no one moved, and no one breathed. Eva realized it all at once. The entire congregation was holding their breath, mouths shut tight, eyes open, hands folded, and yet the room echoed with a faint, continuous hum. The organ began to play, on its own, low, hollow, familiar. Each note struck deeper than the last, until the melody took shape them, not as it had been sung that night long ago, but changed, fuller, hungrier. Eva felt her throat tighten, her lungs ached, but her body would not inhale. She turned to leave, but the doors had vanished. Not shut, gone. The chapel had sealed itself. Then the congregation stood in unison. One by one, they turned their heads toward her. Blood began to stream from their noses, their ears, even their fingernails. And still, none of them breathed, until the final note of the organ hit. And that's when it happened. The 12 missing choir members emerged from the walls, their skin pale, their mouths open, their eyes black and glistening. They walked barefoot down the aisle, humming it with breath, but with something else, something older. They stopped in a circle around Eva, and then they exhaled, a single, unified breath that shattered the crucifix above. Eva screamed, but the sound wasn't hers. It was a high, angelic note, rising in pitch and echoing across the walls like a thread sewing something shut. Every candle burst into flame. The altar cracked, and from the floor beneath Eva's feet, a 13th voice whispered, "One verse left." Episode 10. The choir's last breath. The song wasn't meant to end in harmony. It was meant to unlock something. After the silent mass, Saint Amaris fell into a hush, even deeper than before. No one spoke. No one remembered what had happened at the nuns. Not the students. Not even Father Raphael, whose hands now trembled whenever he neared the altar. Only Eva remembered. because the 13th voice still whispered inside her. It no longer hummed or sang, it breathed, inhale, exhale, like it was waiting for her to join in. Sister Magdalena took her aside that night, her face gaunt, her eyes sunken with sleepless terror. "Hear the last note," she said, voice barely a whisper. They sang their parts, 12 voices for 12 veils. But a hymn like this, it needs a final verse, a sacrifice. Eva didn't answer. She couldn't. Her voice belonged to something else now. But she followed Magdalena through the winding halls of the convent, down through the broken crooked door beneath the chapel. They descended, back into the pit. The candlelight flickered against the bone-carved chamber. The ropes still lay there in a circle, but now one was missing. Eva's. The 13th rope had vanished. In its place, a mirror stood tall, old, rimmed with black iron thorns. But it didn't show Eva's reflection. It showed the choir, all 12 of them, standing behind her. She turned. No one was there. She turned back to the mirror. They were smiling. The hymn began, again slow, mournful, seductive. It seeped through the mirror like smoke, curling around Eva's feet, crawling up her legs, coiling around her throat like a promise and a noose all at once. Her breath caught, then her mouth opened, and this time she sang. 1 note, 2, 3. The mirror pulsed. The chamber shook. Sister Magdalena cried out behind her, "No, Eva, if you sing the last verse, that door won't close, I will open." But Eva couldn't stop. The melody poured from her like blood from a wound cure. Beautiful, terrible. It wasn't hers anymore. It had never been. It belonged to what was waiting behind the veil. As she hit the final note, the mirror shattered it outward, but inward, like it had been sucked into itself. And beyond the broken glass was not a reflection. It was a door, and something was standing just on the other side. Smiling. Episode 11. The chapel that vanished. When the sun rose, that chapel was gone, and what took its place was never built by hands. The dawn after Eva sang, the final note was not like any other. The sky above St. Amara's school cracked with gold as usual, but where the chapel had once stood anchored for centuries, like a tooth in the earth, there was only scorched grass and silence. Not ruins, not rubble, just absence. The nuns searched frantically, whispering prayers between sobs. Some blamed gas leaks, others wept, clutching rosaries so tight their palms bled. But no one could explain the truth, except Eva, because she hadn't left the chapel. She had crossed through it. When the mirror shattered and the hymn ended, she stepped beyond the veil, not into hell, not into heaven, but into something older, a place shaped like the chapel, but not made of stone. Its walls pulsed like lumps, its ceiling dripped like wet skin. The pews were bones. The altar was a massive, black tomb, and on that tomb stood the choir, all 12, not as ghosts, not as flesh, something in between. They didn't speak, they didn't sing, they simply turned to face her and stepped aside. At the end of the altar tomb was a throne. It pulsed with lightless flame, and above it, hovering just out of reach, hung a book bound in something like leather, with pages that writhed like they were alive. Eva understood instantly. It was the original hymnal, a source, the one from which all sacred music was stolen and sanitized. She stepped forward. Behind her, the 12 began to hum it in melody, but in warning. She reached toward the book, and then the throne whispered, not in words, in feelings. It offered her a trade. Stay, lead, finish the hymn forever. She didn't answer with speech. She looked down at her throat, her silent throat, and pressed her fingers against her neck. And then she screamed, not in fear, not in pain, in defiance. And in that instant, the world above responded. The chapel above exploded into light. From the convent grounds, Sister Magdalena watched in horror and awe as the entire chapel was consumed in a blinding flash and then vanished entirely. No crater, no smoke, just silence. And at the edge of that silence, a single note echoed upward from the soil. Not a scream, not a hymn, a breath. Episode 12. The God that refused the offering. They sang to awaken him, but not all gods wish to be found. Eva stood before the throne of the hymn, a pulsing monument of silence wrapped in shadow and breath. The 12 choir members circled her now, neither alive nor dead, their mouths stitched open by invisible threads. their eyes reflecting a music no mortal could endure. The book hovered above the throne, still pages fluttering without wind. Symbols shifting like water were fusing to freeze into meaning. She had screamed. She had rejected the offering, and for a moment, the realm around her shivered, as if unsure how to react to defiance. Then, the throne spoke again, not with sound, with gravity. Eva's knees buckled. Visions crashed through hermitages to raw, to ancient, stone altars drowned in blood. Children singing under eclipsed skies. Monks gouging out their ears to silence the notes crawling inside their skulls. The hymn wasn't written, it was remembered, a relic of a pre-language worship, a signal, a key. But the God they'd been trying to reach wasn't asleep. He had been hiding. The throne pulsed once more. The hymn surged through the floor of the living chapel like veins carrying poison, reaching up toward the book, demanding it descend. And then it did. The book slammed shut in midair. A booming silence rang out, louder than any voice. The 12 choir members frowned, their mouths tore open at the seams dripping wider than any human anatomy should allow, ready to sing the final chorus, to welcome what they had always believed was salvation. But the throne shuddered, and something refused. A tremor ran through the entire chamber. The book ignited no flame, no heat, just pure annihilation. Pages dissolved into ash that bled upward, disappearing into the blackness above. The 12 began to scream it in sound, but in essence, their bodies cracked, splintered, their harmonies twisted into discordant sobs. Their offering was rejected, and Eva stood still, not because she was brave, but because something inside her was smiling. A crack opened beneath the throne, and from the void below, a voice in it, one of rage, but of contempt, rose like mist. You summoned me with Eli. You stitched my name into your song, but I was never yours. The choir collapsed suddenly by one, pulled downward into the chasm, their voices unraveling like thread, their eyes flickering out like extinguished stars. Eva turned. Behind her, the mirror reformed it whole, but fractured. A way back, she stepped through, and as she emerged from the earth where the chapel once stood, dirt in her hair, ash on her hands, she knew she hadn't finished the hymn. She had unwritten it, and somewhere far below, beneath even the roots of silence, something was still listening, but it was no longer interested in being found. Episode 13, The Choir That Still Sings at Midnight. The hymn was never meant to be finished, but it was never meant to be forgotten either. Saint Amara's is silent now. The grounds are sealed, the headmistress gone, the nuns scattered across different dioceses, most of them unable to speak of what happened or too afraid to try. The chapel never returned. Only a circle of scorched earth remains where it once stood, untouched by grass, snow, or shadow. But at exactly midnight, every night, the wind stops, and if you press your ear to the ground, beneath that blackened soil, you'll hear it, the choir, still singing. Eva never went home. She walks now, quietly, unseen, through the abandoned corridors of the school till the school is no longer listed on any map. Some say she was taken, others claim she was chosen, but the truth is far stranger. She's the hymn's echo now, and she is not alone. Recordings of the melody have started surfacing again in broken radios, in untuned pianos, even in old answering machines that were never plugged in. Always the same notes, always at 12 a.m., a melody that doesn't exist in any hymnal and never ends. There are those who listen, of course, curious students, skeptical priests, YouTubers with cameras and crucifixes. But the song doesn't want believers. It wants participants. One by one, those who listen closely enough begin to hum it unconsciously. First in dreams, then while brushing their teeth, then while staring alone into a mirror, and then they vanish. No struggle, no sound, only an empty room and a single drop of blood where their breath last touched the air. Some say they're joining Eva, others say the choir never truly vanished, that it was never 12 students and a mute girl, that it's always been 13 voices waiting for the next verse to be written. Last week, a priest in Rome collapsed at his pulpit mid-sermon. He had been speaking in Latin, but when they replayed the recording, his voice matched the exact pitch of the hymn from Saint Amara's. Backwards, the Vatican has sealed the file, but they couldn't stop the audio from leaking. It's online now, buried deep in the web. One click, that's all it takes. One note, and you'll start to hum too. So if you find it, if the video starts playing by itself at midnight, if the choir finds you, don't sing, don't listen, and whatever you do, don't breathe in harmony.
Epilogue, the final silence. The loudest horror isn't a scream. It's a silence that waits to be filled. They say sound never truly disappears, it travels endlessly, fading, stretching across time like an invisible scar on the fabric of existence. So what happens when a song is made not to be sung, but to be preserved? What happens when the silence that follows it is alive? Eva doesn't speak anymore. Not because she can't, but because she understands now. The hymn wasn't a prayer. It was a pattern. And patterns spread. In the years that followed Amara's vanishing, there were incidents. A choir in Poland that collectively vanished mid-performance, their final note echoing for 11 minutes. A monastery in Peru where every crucifix turned upside down at midnight, and a single bleeding word was etched into every wall, HUM. A child in Osaka who sang in perfect Latin despite never hearing it before, then bit off his own tongue and smiled with red teeth. Each event shared one detail, a recording. Always grainy, always distorted, always containing the same fragment of the hymn. Governments blamed hoaxes. The church issued silence. But the sound kept traveling, beyond speakers, beyond screens, beyond reason. And those who listened too long? They joined the silence beneath it. As for Eva, she's not in this world anymore. Not fully. Sometimes. At 12 a.m. In towns near where Amara's once stood, strangers claim to see a girl walking barefoot along old roads. Her eyes closed, her lips slightly parted, mouthing a song that only the dead remember. If you try to speak to her, she won't answer. If you record her, your camera will die. But if you hum along, even by accident, you may notice something strange the next night. Your reflection will blink before you do. Your voice will tremble with a note that doesn't belong to you. And your breath. It will sync with 12 others you can't see. Until one night, you wake up in an empty chapel that no longer exists, and find that you are the 13th verse. So if the air around you ever stills, if the world goes quiet all at once, if a melody rises in your throat that you never learned, you already know how it ends. Hold your breath, and pray it forgets you.